Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Ison Brothers, at the Ison Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do, nothing else. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA Medical Certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. And, of course, if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So, whether you're laughing at us or with us, join us brothers as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification. Well, what are we talking about today, people? It's been a while.
How about asthma? Well, you can do that because you suffer from asthma.
No, I don't.
You had asthma.
I never had it.
You did too have asthma.
Never once.
When you were 3.
I don't know anything about it.
This is off to a really rocky start. People probably are wondering, or maybe they don't care where we've been, but
Busy, doing work,
Yeah.
working on cases,
yeah.
keeping.
You guys have cases?
keeping
You know what I find interesting?
people in the air.
You know what I find interesting?
Do tell.
If you go on the Reddit, the one of the major complaints is, what can an attorney do in a medical case? I know we've talked about this before, but
You have to ask. You don't need an attorney.
Well, what can they do my AME can't do? I would think AMEs have direct line to the AMCD.
Listen, are we disparaging those people with your voice? Or
Yeah,
what?
I am.
Okay.
So it's just a bone of contention that they just refuse.
Somebody
to accept.
doesn't like you.
Yeah.
Does that hurt your feelings?
Yeah.
Well, guess what?
Well, here we are. So asthma, again, is it something you can get a medical certificate with?
Absolutely. That's all you need to know.
That's all there is.
Goodbye. Well, anyhow, asthma is one of those conditions that are khaki qualified. Is that correct?
That's correct. Alex,
Khaki.
what is khaki?
Conditions AME can issue.
CACI. That's no caca. So with a khaki condition, if you have all your ducks in a row when you go in to see your AME and you're able to provide the required documentation at that examination, your AME looks at it. He basically checks the boxes as to what is on the khaki workflow for that condition. And bada bing, bada boom, you walk out with a medical, assuming everything can be.
What kind of ducks are we looking at, Christopher?
Well, when it comes to.
I think it's a mallard.
Is it mallard?
More of a mallard.
I prefer to think of myself as an eagle. So, in order to be khaki qualified, the FAA will expect an applicant who experiences symptoms of asthma no more than 2 days per week. So, if you go in there and you tell your AME, yeah, I have it 3-4 times a week, well, you're not going to be khaki qualified, and your AME is not going to be able to issue a medical there on the spot. It'll have to go to Oklahoma City. You'll have to defer to Oklahoma City, which means you'll walk out of there without a medical, and you'll have to wait for the long mail from the FAA, the however long it takes them. Blah, 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 blah. However long it takes the FAA to get their act together to get the application, see what the issue is, and then generate an informational request letter to be mailed out by snail mail to the airman applicant. So if you go in there and you have symptoms no more than 2 days per week, well, so far you're off on the right track. You might be able to get a medical through the khaki protocol when you walk out of there. If the FAA expects that in order to be khaki qualified, the applicant should not have to use inhaled short-acting beta agonist or rescue inhaler more than 2 times per week, and the use of oral corticosteroids.
Oh my gosh.
Did I get it right?
Corticosteroids.
Oh my God, I got it right.
Yeah.
For exacerbation should be no more than 2 times per year within the preceding year. How am I going to prove that to these guys? I mean, I just go in there and say that, but is that going to suffice?
I bet a letter coming from your treating physician is coming down the pipe.
I wasn't looking at you. I was looking at Anthony.
Hey, well, I got it right, and you know it.
Okay.
Well, that's right.
So not to be too flippant about this, but
Well, go ahead and get a letter from your doctor because the AME, the aviation medical examiner, is going to want to see a letter from your treating physician identifying that you are khaki qualified or that you meet these various criteria in order to be khaki qualified.
Sounds like a lot of circular.
A lot
reasoning.
of khaki qualifying, yes.
So what if I walk in there and I am having to use my rescue inhaler more than 2 times per week?
Well, at that point, your AME is going to say, well, listen, Sonny, you're not khaki qualified. Therefore, I'm going to defer your application, and the FAA will have to consider your condition as to whether or not you're eligible for a medical certificate at all. But more likely than not, the FAA is going to look at this to ascertain whether or not, even though you're not khaki qualified, are you eligible for a special issuance. And a special issuance, of course, is a waiver where the FAA essentially identifies that you're not eligible for a medical certificate, but within the federal air surgeon's discretion, you're able to be issued a medical certificate pending your continued compliance with various criteria that they outline.
Is it possible that they could just give you I guess if you're not khaki qualified, there's no way that they're going to just give you a letter of eligibility and say there's no need for additional follow up periodically through a special issuance. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Does it have?
So
can it only be a special issuance if I'm not khaki qualified?
I suppose if you had like childhood asthma, you're not being treated for it now. You haven't been treated for it in years, or maybe it's sports induced asthma.
But if I'm not khaki qualified, I mean, I'm saying I'm using the inhaler more than 2 times a week.
Well, then in that case, you're only looking at special issuance.
Okay.
But swinging the pendulum the other way, if my asthma is so well documented to be
dormant,
dormant, you could maybe make the argument to say, hey, listen, Paco, I don't need a special issuance or a khaki because this is ancient history.
Gotcha. Looking more at the khaki.
But let me back up.
Oh my God.
Please. Beep. If with respect to the run of the mill, you're probably going to find a khaki is the run of the mill situation.
Okay. Let's assume we're still on this khaki path because there's a few more things here that we have to go over. The FAA is also going to expect that the applicant have had no inpatient hospitalizations and no more than 2 outpatient clinical or urgent care visits for exacerbations with symptoms fully resolved. What does that mean? Just what I said.
Exactly what you said.
Major episodes.
If I'm going to the doctor or the emergency room or maybe not the doctor, but if I'm going to outpatient urgent care or the emergency room regularly, the thought process is that, hey, listen, this asthma is not well under control. This is something's out of whack. And what the FAA is looking for are people that are stable on their current course of treatment. And so if I'm just all over the place, erratic with my symptoms, it's not something that's stable enough that the FAA can sort of put you on cruise control with the khaki program.
Let me ask you this. The way you've written this here is confusing.
Flawless. I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever written.
Huge.
What are you talking about?
So
written what?
I'm about to recite it.
Our blog article on asthma?
Asthma. The FAA also expects that an applicant have had no inpatient hospitalizations and no more than 2 outpatient clinical/urgent care visits for exacerbations. Parentheses with symptoms fully resolved. In parentheses.
So what they're getting at here.
No. Here's the question. Don't interrupt. Is there a time frame on a look back for this? Is it in your life or within the last year? Do you know? Did you forget to put it in there?
No, I believe it's within the last year.
Where does it say that?
Well,
It doesn't say that. Overruled.
Your Honor, I don't have an excuse. I believe it's within the last year.
Okay. So there may be a time frame there with respect to that particular khaki criterion that may or may not be within the last year.
I mean, who gets on the podcast and then starts bringing up things that are potentially,
We're talking about asthma.
Problematic. Yeah,
we could have been done with this 5 minutes ago. I'm trying to vamp.
But you're bringing up problematic issues in our article that you put me on the spot. You should have said beforehand, "Hey, listen, dummy, you need
to go back and amend this.
This article is problematic. Well, tell me what. Tell me you're going to put me on the spot before you do so.
Okay. While you continue to look that up,
I'm going to look it up
feverishly and frantically.
I'm going to look it up because I've been called a fool by my own flesh and blood. Okay, I'm going on here to the khaki asthma worksheet. It says right here,
Say it.
in the last year, no inpatient hospitalizations, no more than 2 outpatient clinic urgent care visits for exacerbations with symptoms fully resolved. So I apologize to anybody who had the misfortune of reading our asthma blog article because I failed to note that it's within the past year.
Just think of how many
Not
people
ever.
are out there that are
They've given up their dreams.
giving up the
and
dream
hopes
of flying because they couldn't meet the khaki criteria that.
I gave up flying because I couldn't wait and balance. Big boy.
Yeah.
Face for radio.
So we get that figured out. Now, the next one here that you may or may not have written correctly on this blog post is, if you're using medication to treat your asthma, keep in mind that the FAA only finds the following acceptable: inhaled long-acting beta agonist, inhaled short-acting beta agonist. So it don't matter. You can have a long or short.
They should have just
Beta agonist.
just say the beta agonist.
Beta agonist. And as an example, we're talking about albuterol, inhaled corticosteroids. I'm not even
Leukotriene receptor antagonists. So things like monoleucas or Singulair.
All right.
Singulair is a popular one,
And then monoclonal antibodies,
but they're not
however,
accepted.
are not acceptable. So that could have probably been its own bullet in a separate thing, but whatever. So monoclonal antibodies, if you're taking one of those or are on that or however that's administered,
You know what's nice about
is
this
not
podcast?
something that you can take and be khaki qualified. So
This
you're going to
is-
get deferred.
This is a conversation not only about asthma but grammar. Apparently, you're going to roast me and skewer me. But yeah, you can't take monoclonal antibodies and be eligible for the khaki program. So you would get deferred. And then if the FAA gives you a medical, it likely would be a special issuance.
Okay. The very last bullet point that you have listed here is that the FAA expects that your pulmonary function test will produce results showing your FEV1, FVC, and FEV1/FVC are equal to or greater than 80% predicted before bronchodilators.
You know what's weird is that almost never, I wouldn't say almost never, I've certainly seen cases where the FAA want to see pulmonary function tests. Lots of times, though, I don't see them demanding to see the pulmonary function test. So in theory, if you had a letter from your doctor and it didn't reference the pulmonary function tests, I've not seen them necessarily nitpick that.
Interesting. So let's say you come in with a letter from your treating pulmonologist or primary care physician, I suppose.
Sure.
Who does that have to be?
It says treating physician, so
you don't need to go out and find a pulmonologist if you don't have one.
That's right.
Okay, so let's say you come in with a letter from a doctor who's treating you for your asthma. And you can show that you have no more symptoms in the last 2 weeks per his letter, that you don't use your rescue inhaler more than 2 times per week per his letter, or that you don't use oral corticosteroids or for exacerbations more than 2 times in the last preceding year. And as we've now discovered, within the preceding year, that you've not required any inpatient hospitalizations and no more than 2 outpatient clinical urgent care visits, clinic care visits, and you're not on some disqualifying medication. But you don't have, maybe you do, maybe you don't have your pulmonary function test. You come in there, you got all that on a little scrap of paper from your doctor. You give it to your AME. He looks it over. What's he going to do? What is he allowed to do? I don't know what he's going to do because sometimes the AMEs go off on their own tangents. But what is he under the law?
It could be a she under the law.
Whatever.
The expectation is that the AME is going to issue the medical certificate.
That's the expectation?
You know, I'm feeling a little bit guilty right now because I wasn't really listening to your fact pattern.
You never do. You never do. But you got the answer right.
Good.
The expectation is that they're going to issue your medical certificate despite the fact that you have a history of asthma. And you're assuming that they find you otherwise meet the standards for medical certification and there's no other kind of concerning mental or health issue that you have.
Mental health for you,
Yeah. And that would require deferral. Otherwise, you get the medical and off you go.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's back way up.
Oh boy.
Before even...
There's a sound effect.
Beep. Yeah, that's right. So on the medical application, where am I going to put asthma?
18F, Foxtrot.
Yep. So 18F as in Foxtrot asks about asthma or lung disease. Now, the interesting thing about question 18 on the MedExpress, the 8500-8, is that it asks, have you ever in your life, I mean, they put this in big bold letters, capitalized. They can put the caps lock on. Have you ever...
They're yelling at you.
Yeah. Have you ever... It's like grandma writing something. Have you ever in your life been diagnosed with, had, or do you presently have any of the following? And so, blah, blah, blah. You know, and then he gets down to question 18F, asthma or lung disease. So, take Christopher, for example.
I don't know why you keep taking me. I never had it.
Yeah, no, it's
Never had
an
it.
overweight gentleman, middle 30s, graying hair, upper 30s,
With current chest tightness.
with current chest tightness, and history of childhood asthma, allegedly. Would you have to put, as stupid as it is that I have to even say this, would somebody like you with that history put yes to 18F?
One should.
One should. Okay. Now, with that being said, what happens if you don't put it down? What are you going to do then?
Well, you should do an amendment if you've discovered that you've incorrectly answered a question on the 8500. An amendment, in theory, should be brought to the FAA's attention before they bring it to your attention. If they brought it to your attention, it's most likely going to be too late to do the amendment, and you wouldn't want to do that at that point because it could kind of be an omission. But by doing an amendment proactively and bringing it to the FAA's attention, saying, listen, you know, I failed to disclose this on my application. Please allow me this opportunity to correct it. I'd like to amend to include a yes answer, an affirmative answer to question 18F in this case to reflect the history of asthma.
Even if it's childhood asthma.
Even if it's childhood asthma, because it has a lifetime look back. So if you're a 38-year-old overweight gentleman with graying hair sitting on a podcast and somewhere in Central Florida, and you've realized, oh, I had asthma when I was 4, and I didn't put it on my 8500 application. Well, you should go out there, sir, and do an amendment to reflect that history. Now, once you do that, then what's the question become?
Well,
what happens from there?
Well, in theory, the FAA is going to send you back a letter saying, hey, we want a letter from your doctor identifying essentially these khaki criteria. See if you are khaki qualified.
It is a small world.
Yeah, that's right. Now, what we would potentially recommend is send that in with your amendment if you have time. What I mean by that, if you have time, unless this is an urgent amendment, which most of them are, but you should get a letter from your doctor to send in with the amendment or shortly thereafter.
Streamline it.
Yeah, because the FAA is going to ask for this, and so might as well put it all right in front of them at the same time. One other thing I would reference is
however, in this particular example, though, I don't know if you were paying attention, this guy has...
It's my example.
It doesn't mean you're paying attention. This guy's had it for 34 years without any incidents.
He's not using incense to treat it.
Incestuous. But he hasn't had any incidents of asthma. 34 years, right?
Yes,
let's just use that as an example. You still need all this. I mean, he hasn't seen a doctor in 34 years for this problem. He doesn't have a doctor, right? This guy's got to go out there. This guy's got to go out there and get a letter.
Yeah, he's going to have to go find
time and money and find.
He's going to have to find a doctor.
Okay.
Go find a doctor. Have them. They'll probably maybe they do a pulmonary function test. Say, hey, this old boy's doing just fine.
Yeah. Breathe
So,
into this.
Alex,
little-
would it be-
find a doctor for Christopher? sir.
Would it be beneficial to go back and try to find the treating doctor when you were 4? Try to request the records. That way you can show that there's no
Fortunately, he's
documentation
alive.
out
I know where
there.
he's at. So
I don't think. Now, one other thing I would say is that when your doctor writes a letter for you for the khaki program, you want to be careful as to what collateral damage there could be in that letter, right? So if they provide a detailed clinical progress note rather than a narrative letter, for example, what's going to be in the social history, what's going to be in any other section of the records that you provide. If it's saying, hey, yeah, his asthma's doing just fine, but he does a line of Coke every day and,
well, he doesn't do that.
Well, I've moved on from you being a hypothetical person.
that's
Christopher
good.
doesn't do Coke
No.
that I'm aware of.
You think a guy with all this energy over here is doing
So Christopher doesn't do Coke. But
Diet Coke?
Diet Coke, that he hits hard. He hits that hard.
Yeah.
But that being said, you want to be careful what else these records say. I can't tell you how many times we've seen somebody send in a letter from their doctor or detailed clinical progress note, and they think, oh, yeah, I'm answering this question on this relatively innocuous issue. And the next thing you know, they've got a denial for substance abuse, or they have an inquiry regarding their alcohol use.
Or even worse, now they got a letter of investigation.
Oh, yeah.
And now their certificates are in jeopardy of being
Yeah.
revoked for falsifying
You didn't
past
tell us that
applications.
you're taking Xanax and
that they can now
hydrocodone.
prove because you sent in a document for your asthma. Of course, if you have these other bigger issues, I'm sure the asthma isn't going to be the one that you're going to be amending for. Probably.
Although I don't know, I've seen cases where it's been, and I guess maybe you have too. I don't know what you see, but we've seen cases where it's like,
what you tell me to
hey,
see.
I'm sending in this letter on this problem I had, and then boom, you've got you don't think about, especially with like, I've seen it with like medical marijuana. People just don't seem to think that that's a from the FAA's perspective until it's too late. And they think, it's being diagnosed with something and being treated with it from a medical professional, but still illicit. Because
Briefly.
So I'm going off on a tangent.
Briefly, let me segue over to the other condition that is referenced in 18F. It's not just asthma, it's asthma and lung disease.
So I got COPD. I've
Sarcoidosis.
got sarcoidosis. I've got, I guess in theory, no.
Lung cancer?
I got lung cancer.
Yeah.
That. Emphysemas.
All those issues there.
Now, those aren't khaki necessarily, right? So most of those conditions are either going to require a special issuance or might just get denied altogether. But for the most part, these are conditions that would be outside the khaki criteria.
So they're outside the khaki criteria. They may require special issuance. Maybe not, though. Maybe it's
not.
possible you could
maybe if I
squeak
had,
through it.
Maybe if I had lung cancer, 20 years ago, and I'm doing just fine now.
Pulmonary function tests are normal.
Yeah, everything's
There's been no
fine.
risk of recurrence.
Sure.
No symptoms of it. And so you
Maybe
can
there's an argument
Maybe
there.
make an argument that's not aeromedically significant.
I think the FAA, though, will tend to err on the side of what's it to them? Put you on a special issuance, follow you regularly every year. We'll just see a letter from your doctor, pulmonary function test, to make sure you're doing well so you're not at risk for sudden incapacitation.
Would imaging be involved with that?
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
MRI or CT
What would
scan?
you order, doctor?
A few more ka-ching-ka-chings at the cash register.
Yeah, right. Probably a CT scan of the chest with contrast to see if there's any.
He's just putting letters next to
He's
each
just
other.
stringing words together he's heard before. Yep.
On this podcast.
Yeah.
Well,
In my head.
Anything else you care to add to the...
Wasn't there some story about a guy that had hang on.
About a
keep talking amongst yourselves for a second.
What happened
Asthma pilot incapacitated. I thought there was a news article. Yeah. Keep doing.
Anthony's looking
that
it up
noise.
here.
Keep doing that noise.
That's enough of that noise. That's annoying.
No, keep talking. I guess I'll just keep saying.
Maybe if we were going to have a podcast on asthma, you'd come prepared.
Yeah. Well, hey,
You'd get the facts right.
All right,
on your
listen to
blog
this.
and have the article.
this is an
already pulled up.
abstract. A case of 43-year-old fighter pilot with bronchial asthma. This is the abstract. I'm reading on PubMed Advanced User Guide, National Library of Medicine.
Okay, we've given the appropriate credit.
Yeah, don't.
source.
Yeah. A Japan Air Self-Defense a Japan Air Self-Defense Force JASTF fighter pilot with adult onset atopic bronchial asthma was successfully returned to flying status. This was against the common wisdom of most Japanese military flight surgeons.
What is this, 1941?
1999. Bronchial asthma generally results in permanent disqualification from flying duties because of possible acute incapacitation during flight. This JASTF pilot was treated with inhaled medications, including beclomethasone, for 6 months with suppression of all clinical symptoms. All medications were discontinued and the pilot was observed for another 7 months before resumption of flying status. The aeromedical disposition was based on the thinking that his long asymptomatic period indicated bronchial inflammation was resolved, bronchial reactivity was improved, and thus the risk of exacerbation was reduced. Ultimately, this article is meaningless to this podcast, and I thought it was something different.
Well, I mean, I think it hits some key words there. I mean, they're looking for a risk of recurrence,
Yeah,
you know, the exacerbation of symptoms, etc. So, I mean, it could have been better, but I'll give you a 4 out of 10 on it.
Yeah. Hey, here's one more. You want to hear one more?
Is it on point?
Yeah. Asthma and military aviators. Safe flying is possible.
Well, say no more.
Asthma is considered relatively incompatible with aviation, according to this author, Dan Carter et al. What a weird last name, et al. Firstly, due to the risk of sudden incapacitation, and secondly, due to cold and dry air and other asthmogenic factors characteristic of the aviation environment. The medical requirements for flying fitness of asthmatic aviators are inconsistent between different air services, and many flight surgeons are unfamiliar with the recent developments in asthma management. This study aims to describe our experience with asthmatic aviators and to discuss the medical standards required for flying fitness in chronic asthma. So they go on to discuss what they found and so on. But the results in this study, which is asthma and military aviators, safe flying is possible, 19 Israeli Air Force aviators with asthma were studied. Most were treated with inhaled long-acting beta agonists, which we've already discussed, are khaki qualified, and corticosteroids.
Also,
khaki qualified. Disease control was satisfactory in more than 90%, with significant worsening in only one case. That would be you, the one case.
Without a doubt.
We had no cases of sudden incapacitation or any other safety breach. One aviator was grounded 23 years after diagnosis due to deterioration in the severity of the disease, and another aviator was permanently grounded 1 year after diagnosis. So their conclusion was that adequate asthma control is readily feasible, even in the aviation environment.
Adequate asthma control.
Adequate asthma. Yeah,
Adequate asthma control.
my assessment for adequate asthma control. Long-term inhaled corticosteroids are effective and have few side effects in aviators. Our management approach to aviators with asthma appears to be safe and effective. So ultimately, what they're getting at is consistent with the khaki program, which is, hey, you know, if you're doing well, you're largely going to be doing well.
It's almost as if these criteria for the khaki protocol were based on
research?
Some kind of research.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Who'd have thought? All right.
I think we've flogged that one pretty good.
Yep.
Say the thing.
Okay, well, you've logged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer podcast. And since we recently got flack about the saying about our wives not knowing
Apparently the
in
wives
public,
didn't like that line.
well, one of the wives. We're the Ison Brothers of the Ison Law Firm. We'll see you next time.
This is the podcastfactory.com.